Welcome to Melt University. This series will help you build your brand, inform you on a variety of career paths, and introduce you to top executives in sports and marketing. Now, here's your host, the president and CEO of Melt, one of the largest independent sports and event marketing agencies in the country, Vince Thompson.
Welcome back, students. Melt University, virtual Melt University, continuing to evolve our program. We just had an amazing 8-week run. Thanks to many of you for your participation, your feedback, your attitude. Thanks to our guests. It's been amazing. And as we chug into August and chug into fall and hopefully chug into a fall full of sports all the way around, it could be an amazing fall with both the Masters and college football and NFL football and NBA and MLB and all played on the same weekend, which would be phenomenal. But today we have an extraordinarily special guest who is at the forefront of a lot of things that we have been talking about and we're talking about in the sports world and sports industry world. She's a leader and a pioneer, and I have such a high regard for her and personal regard for her as well. Raleigh Gray is the Senior Director of Athlete Exchange at Wasserman Agency, and founder of Much Loved Sports. And we've talked about, Casey Wasserman and Wasserman, one of the leaders in the global sports marketing industry, the chairman of the 2028 Olympic Committee. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But Raleigh Ann graduated from University of Virginia. I think I still owe her a bet from the Auburn Final Four in 2019. She's got a master's in strategy and entrepreneurship from Vanderbilt, got a little ACC in her and a little SEC in her, and has also been at some amazing places. Started her career at ESPN, was director of live content for Twitter. We'll talk about some of the future of sports and social media, whether she thinks social media companies will begin even more aggressively bidding on sports rights fees. She was the director of MyMove.com for Red Ventures with Players Tribune, another athlete-driven content platform that I'm a big fan of. And I want to talk about, her passion and must love sports. She's doing a lot of amazing things too that you should begin following her on, networking her with, and relationship building. But and she's probably going to wind up being like the commissioner of the NFL or NBA one day. So we all may be working for her. So Raleigh Ann, thank you so much for joining our virtual Melt University.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. And you are quite my hype man, Vince. So anytime that you're, I need to get this recording myself to just play over.
or wherever you go into a room, I'll just be like the ringside announcer. I'll bring you in. But no, I know I have such a high regard for you. And I think once our students start following you and interacting with you and learning from you and the great programming and everything. And we have had tremendous positive feedback from our students. And one thing I want to start on is that what we've heard from a lot of our guests is, how they, and in fact, in the college environment, I want to take it back to that, is that, you clearly, in my opinion, I don't know this, but you clearly have sort of like me, you have always had a passion for sports and the sports business. Where did that start for and with you? And then in your college days, how did you manifest that?
Sure. So again, thank you guys so much for having me, and to all the students. I apologize. Your summer was initially supposed to be a little different, but it sounds like from what I'm hearing and what I suspect certainly that Vince set you up in the best way possible. And Melt U is always one of my favorite stops in the summer. So I'm honored to be here. But yeah, so in terms of what drove my initial interest in sports, I don't know about you guys, but every major family thing, I'm an only child, single parent, and every major family thing was a sporting event with my cousins. My birthday falls in October, so it's always football season. And we would go to my mom's alma mater, which I'm named after, at, well, Raleigh, North Carolina. It's NC
Hmm.
State. So it was either
I did not realize that. I didn't realize
there
that.
you go. Yeah. So it was either that or Jimmy Valvano. So I think she
No,
thought the wiser.
I think she chose right.
Yeah, but we would go to NC State games, and that was the highlight. I got to see my family. I got to enjoy sports, and I always had such an association with sports being really fun, regardless of the outcome of the game. Right? You're there for the experiential side, which you guys at Melt have such intense understanding and value of. So that started my love of sports. Then you get into high school and college, particularly for me playing sports in high school. You learn so much, right? I like to think of myself as a mildly smart person. I am not a book smart person.
I think you probably qualify for that.
Yeah, well, I learned more on the field with my coach and my
Hmm.
teammates than I learned in the classroom that at least I apply today. So that was sort of the next phase. And then when you get to your university, if you're lucky enough and you sort of value this when you're looking at schools, to go to a school that has sports programs, particularly for me going to UVA and it being in the ACC, still in the same conference as NC State, which creates some issues between my mom and I. And then now I'm married to a Carolina boy, so that's a whole
Well,
nother
you got it. You
situation.
got house divided everywhere.
Oh my goodness, we don't talk during basketball. Now we've decided the only game we can go to together is Virginia Duke because he is so adamant
Yeah,
against
yeah.
one that it helps offset the
We
other.
almost find common ground in relationships. That's for sure.
Exactly. So that fervor and excitement then obviously channeled there, and I was able to get the great opportunity to work in the sports information department, and that's where my career really started to see this business of sports as
At the
opposed to that.
University of Virginia, and I'm not sure I remembered that because my experience came from the Auburn Sports Information Department. And one thing I want you to talk about as we continue this interview, but so many the Sports Information Department and the Athletic Department. There's so many great opportunities. But so how did you? And one thing we talk to our kids about is taking that shot and going in and volunteering. How did you make your way to the Virginia Sports Information Department?
Absolutely. So obviously, I had a passion for what I was watching, classmates do on the field, but I decided to really channel that because Virginia at the time didn't necessarily have like a journalism program
Right,
and didn't
right.
have that extension. So I found it in working on the school newspaper, the Cavalier Daily, or working in other directions. And I started to talk to a lot of my friends who I could name, who some of them you know and work with, but who were writers for the Cavalier Daily on the sports side. And they were like, listen, we're pretty full up here. You're not going to get the access you want. You would have had to start, in your first year. That's what we call freshman year at Virginia. And I said, okay, well, what are some good extensions? And they said, go talk to Rich Murray over at the Sports Information office. He's the director, the SID, and talk to him, see if he's got anything. So I, of course, went in guns blazing, wanting to work on football and basketball, the revenue
Right.
sports. And that's not what was available. So I started just working on soccer and lacrosse and baseball because I had conversations with literally everyone in their office in my freshman year, knowing that an opportunity would come to fruition. I just had to be A, prepared to have had those conversations, and B, take whatever was going to be available because that was my only inroad. And I couldn't be picky in wanting football and basketball.
And so I think you must be reading our script or reading my book because you just touched on two or three things that our students have heard a lot and will continue to hear. So literally in sort of a way, when you approached the student newspaper, you were told no. And you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna not accept that. And so what's the second choice? Well, go to sports information. So then you go to sports information, and one thing we've hit on with our students, Raleigh Ann, and one thing that they want and need to hear is that you don't become the CEO after 3 months. You don't become the head of football sports information after 3 months. And there are unicorns out there, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world that we all focus on, but there's 9,099,000 that aren't unicorns. And we have to take what we can. We have to accept that grind. We have to get our foot in the door, because you can't raid the castle until you get the keys to the front door. And so you just unpacked, revealed 2 or 3 major lessons. You were told to no, then you went and took another shot. Then you were told, okay, you got the shot, but it's not going to be on the marquee programs until you pay your dues. So talk about your philosophy in that approach, because that's exactly mine, by the way.
Well, anytime that I can align with some of that, that's a good day for me. So I'm happy to
Oh,
hear that. But I honestly had experienced a lot of that. I want this, but didn't get it in high school or college, or even
hmm
when I got into and continued to in my career experience those pitfalls or really good learnings where I don't get what I want. And I say always, I'm sure there were points when I was younger where I just said, oh, that's, pardon me, crap. And
hmm
I feel like I deserved it and I didn't push. But
hmm
I always do my best to learn from those. So whether it was not making the soccer team and then making it, or not making the basketball team in high school and then actually becoming the manager and still getting to be around the game, finding whatever place that I was meant to be in, if I knew that I had tried my best. I was waitlisted at UVA, honestly. I had applied early. I was so excited. And
hmm
I didn't get in at first glance. It was the first year they did it online. So I remember logging in and getting really disheartened. And I was like, okay,
hmm
well, that was a soft no. I'll wait till I get my hard no,
hmm
and I'll do my best. So I always have turned that in and to some sort of fire, right? Like when I got to UVA, because I had been waitlisted, I sort of felt as though I shouldn't be there. So
So
when I got
you had a little bit of a chip on your shoulder.
a little bit, yeah, for
Hmm
sure. It's
I
like,
get
well, I
that.
wasn't supposed to be here, so let me go prove to them why I'm the best thing here. Now, that's not the case. There's so many smarter, amazing people at that university, but I wanted
Sure.
to prove myself. So, same thing with sports information. I had to work hard to get there because I had gotten a soft no on the other side. So, if you can kind of pick your head up, learn from that situation, not let it affect you negatively too much, you can always find the other path, right? It's like the two roads thing. You just have to sometimes cut the path and create it
hmm
yourself.
hmm
And you have to be confident that you've tried your hardest while also being effective and not necessarily turning people off to, there's a positive way to do it as opposed to a really arrogant, directionless approach.
Right. Right. And we one of our favorite sayings in our program is, the letters NO don't spell the words no. It's the first 2 letters of not yet. And the kids are learning that, because you know when they get in the real world, they're going to get thrown into the tumble cycle. They're going to get thrown off the saddle. Life's not going to be linear. One thing I want to talk to you about is that the entry level job market overall, and in the sports and events industry, is going to be brutal for a couple of reasons. You've got a lot of people in marketing services who are unemployed, who are willing to take a lesser job for a lesser wage. That's going to squeeze the job market. The second thing is if people aren't in their offices right now, you can't come in there and get that appointment. You can't come in there and make that first impression. You got to do it virtually. You got to do it, on Zoom. And so one thing that we're talking to our kids about is that, hey, we're all in this together. Everybody wants to help, but you're going to have to be really innovative into to really cracking that code. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. So you have this great run at UVA. You got your soft no, you turned it into a career, and so now you decide to go to the SEC for. I mean, what drove this? Because one thing we hear about a lot of our guests is that they got to college with the intent of doing one thing. They found out they didn't. You might not know what you like in college, but you find out what you don't like. So somebody went to be a doctor and they wound up in brand management. So tell me talk about your process, because a lot of kids, hey, is it okay if I pursue my passion? Is it okay if I don't like what I think my parents want me to like from a major or pursuit perspective? Talk about your path a little bit there.
Sure. So I was a history major at Virginia. That is not at all relevant to what I do today, with the exception of learning how to write and then also read or listen actively. By that, I mean pull things out of a conversation to
Hmm.
remember. That's basically what, historical references are. So I would say that your major, unless it is something like you said, a terminal sort of degree that you're going to get to at some point in medicine or law, is just a way for you to better educate yourself on something that you like at the time, and then pivot it into something else. I got to ESPN. I was very lucky to have interned there in my summer. I then took an opportunity on the marketing team. And when I got there, I realized how majorly deficient I was in the true structures of business,
Hmm.
things like operations, finance, accounting, all of these elements that, of course not. I was a history major. Of
Hmm.
course, I would not have had the
Hmm.
chance to learn them in the traditional curriculum. So that's why I, as you referenced the SEC part, went back to business school. And that was a very personal decision that a lot of people ask me about, particularly because I got to where I wanted to be at age 22. And while you said, yes, of course, I wasn't the CEO there, but I did say I want to work at ESPN, and I
Hmm.
managed to get there quickly.
Hmm.
So a lot of people were kind of looking at me crazy when I left my dream job, but you have to reevaluate and go chase other dreams, or else you're going to kind of stand still and be stagnant over the
Right.
course of time. So it was helpful for me to recognize my flaws and deficiencies quickly, and then also say, okay, I'm confident enough in myself getting off this amazing rocket ship and journey to pivot into, like we talked about, finding that other path, kind of hacking through the forest and figuring out what that was.
Yeah. Well, we've heard a lot where a lot of the great leaders, like yourself and Greg Sankey, that they've always pushed themselves out of their comfort zone. And so, you land in a dream job, ESPN, New York City, Bristol, worldwide leader, and then all of a sudden you're more aware of your surroundings. Like, hey, there's a lot of things here that I don't know, and I need to go make myself better and more equipped and prepared to continue to that climb. And so, how and why did you land it? I mean, I'm obviously partial to the SEC, but so what was your process behind this?
Yeah, sure. So I actually grew up in Nashville, Tennessee,
Uh huh.
and my dad, who passed when I was young, went to Vanderbilt. So I very much considered,
Wow.
okay, I,
Hmm.
I could go to Carolina and UNC, and I could be back where some of my family is, and they've got great journalism school juxtaposed to their MBA program. Maybe that's what I want to do. I could go back to UVA, and I could try and duplicate that undergrad experience that I loved so much.
Hmm.
Or, and honestly, Nashville's grown so much, so this is more of my ignorance than anything. But, when I left at age 18, I sort of wrote it off as this one horse town, which it certainly was not then and definitely is not
No, it's
now.
not. It's not now. It's
Um,
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, I mean, there's more cranes there than anywhere with
Yeah,
new
the state
development.
bird is the of Tennessee's the crane, like Atlanta.
Exactly, exactly. So I was another proof point to myself is, hey, go back, see the value that this amazing town that raised you has in terms of business and industry that I wasn't necessarily exposed to, at least from my own passion and interest perspective. Of course, my mom was phenomenal at sharing what she worked on, but she worked in healthcare. That wasn't something for me. That wasn't what I was focused on. It
Right.
was more of a, let's go to a smaller program in the Southeast where I may end up, you know, staying for a lot longer, or at least will have a lot of um, association with for the rest of my life, because it's also where I grew up.
Hmm. You do Vandy, which is obviously amazing master's program. From there, do you go to Twitter from there?
Yes, but there's that TikTok that's going around right now where it's like a one singular arrow, and then there's another one where it's just a jagged arrow between a whole bunch of points.
Yes.
Um,
We
as
call that life is not linear.
Yes, that's 1,000% true, and it seems I'm picking up on my career at least aligns with a lot of your themes for the summer. If at first you don't succeed,
Oh yeah.
fail a lot, make it
Yep.
nonlinear, and then you can come up with what's next. But I had interned actually actually in Atlanta at Credit Suisse for the summer, and was working on the banking side of the world because I really wanted to push myself in that finance piece that I had missing. And it wasn't for me. It wasn't a passion point. I was happy to have learned it, but I'd always been interested at that intersection of media, technology, and sports. So I went out to San Francisco. Vanderbilt called me actually when we were supposed to have our numbers in for how many people were employed by a certain date for U.S. News and World Report. Asked me if I wanted to take my Credit Suisse offer back. And I said, no, this is what I want to do. So I apologized for messing with their data, and found Twitter at some point through a lot of networking.
You say arbitrarily, I'm going to pack my stuff from Atlanta, go to the West Coast, sight unseen, and I'm going to go to work for one of the largest social media platforms in the country. I mean, you make this sound so easy.
It was not. I'll tell you a hilarious story, which is now funny, but at the time was devastating. I was borrowing friends' apartments who were in their training in New York for the summer, because that was the far more economical way for me to actually get things done. So I was borrowing a friend's apartment. It was Seafair, this weekend they have where they have the Blue Angels fly. So you know how loud those planes, the Navy fighter planes, are. And I had an interview with this gentleman at Twitter who was amazing, who had come from Google. And I had prepared, extensively for the interview. I'd done a lot of research on the company. I'd looked at his profile. I'd considered questions he might ask me. And it was my understanding that it was just supposed to be sort of the personality part of the interview, but he had worked at Google and he came hot from the case study side of things.
Oh, wow.
So he asked me a question. It was a market sizing question. He asked me how many basketballs there were in the United States. The Blue Angels are over my head. It's loud and I'm in somebody else's apartment. So I am just not focused. I'm kind of losing my marbles at this point. I don't size it well, get off the phone and, I'm devastated, crying, and send an email to the person who had helped me get the interview, apologize if I let him down. And then I get an email from the guy I'd been interviewing with. And he said, listen, the person that had introduced us said that you were really disappointed in yourself, and I'd like to give you another chance. I'll be in the car for the next hour.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So, okay.
So divine intervention.
Exactly. And very kind of him. But also, if you didn't send the email right after and you didn't evaluate yourself quickly, you don't get there. So I get back on the phone.
But let's talk about this. The guy had empathy. So you knew you had a shared value system, which
Absolutely.
was an emotional connecting point. And these are these intangible things that we're talking to our kids about in this environment. So within an hour, you kind of like your head's on a pivot and you're back on the phone with it.
Exactly. And this time, because we both knew each other, it was a very different conversation. It was me sharing the ways I knew I could impact in a very candid way, him asking me questions that were not the ones that he had been asking that he knew that I would be likely deficient at answering, and getting to a point. And he became my boss for 3 years. And I sent him that email chain, in 2015 when I rolled into another area of Twitter, and he had some expletives to say about himself, and that he felt badly about the way he'd first approached it, but he was really glad that he gave me that chance. And he's still a great friend to this day and an amazing leader too. So I learned a lot from him, and certainly from that experience. So to answer your question, nonlinear for sure.
Well, I think you hit on several other things that we talk about, and then I want to get back to Twitter for a minute. But
sure.
But we always tell our students, be over prepared. There's no excuse for not knowing your target. And when we say target, we're talking about, so Twitter is your job target, and the individual you were interviewing with, knowing all about them, that information they possess in the palm of their hands through LinkedIn or wherever it is, or Google or Twitter. And then, sort of be prepared in your second go around. You turned around and made these emotional connections, and we say with kids, if you happen to be in Vince Thompson's office and you see something with Auburn, that you can comment and make a comment about Auburn, or a picture of his children, or those types of things. And and I think the other thing is that you we all use the word, and we talk a lot about failure to our kids, but I've learned so much more in failure than I have in defeat and success in victory. And that's one thing that we're telling kids and we're telling the students now is that, yeah, it's going to be a grind, but you can never, ever get discouraged because you don't know how it's going to spin around. So think about it. You called um, your your friend, or you emailed your friend and said, "I think I laid an egg in this interview." Your friend had the gut to send it to the guy. He knew you were an all-star, and there was just some weird things going on in the interview, and he gave you the second chance. And so you shared a value system, and you wound up, being at the forefront of a lot of careers and a lot of experiences at Twitter. So while you were there and now, as we talk to our kids about future job opportunities and future career opportunities, if you had a crystal ball, knowing what you know, and then also being at the position you're in within the industry, do you think major social media platforms will ultimately make giant bids for rights fees for, say, the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball? Because we know cable is in distress. We know our students don't subscribe to cable. We know at some point it's all going to be consumed in that hand. But if you had a crystal ball telling our students there's going to be careers in social media, sports media rights with large social media platforms, do you think that'll happen one day?
It's an interesting question. My last role at Twitter was to work with our team functionally to work on building the NFL live rights that we had acquired and then bring in other live rights. And the difficulty with live rights is they are cost prohibitive to a lot of people who don't have the deeper pockets. So that's not to say that a TikTok or Snapchat or Twitter can't play in that space, but is their money well spent to do that? Facebook is in and of itself its own content behemoth, and I think has sort of leapfrogged the whole idea of being a social media platform at its core. It certainly has social media platforms like Instagram in its purview, but it's not solely what it does. I think what I see for those OTTs, those over the tops that are going to have the rights is something like a DAZN, right? Who outside of the United States has so many rights and has the pockets and funding to be able to go get some of those. But in general, if you think about the number of apps that are on your phone and how many you actually open every day, our content consumption, if you think of it in terms of those apps, has expanded so much. And I think it's going to contract. So I think you're going to see a lot of aggregation similar to the Disney Plus rollout with the Hulu and ESPN packaging and things like that, because at the end of the day, you and I both work in the space, and these students, these guys, y'all are really well versed on where to find what you want, but sometimes you can't. And that's the problem. So I think the cost makes it a little bit prohibitive. The community that's curated on the social channels isn't necessarily there for the live experience. They're there for what happens around it. And then, of course, there's this expansion that now has to contract and come back and add value, in that you're coming to these few places because those are the few you've chosen to matter to you.
No, and that's actually, I had not really thought about it from the angle you just talked about, because the more I get into it, I used to be a little more bullish about it happening in the near future, and I don't think that in the near term that it will. But now goodness knows where all this is going to go. But so let's shift gears a little bit, because one thing that we've tried to do with our students is educate them on, hey, reading various platforms every day for knowledge and information. And we've interviewed a lot of really good founders of platforms such as Sport Techie, Taylor Bloom, Adam White at Front Office Sports. There's now the Athletica. There's now Sportiga. There's the Bleacher Report. There's the Ringer. There's Outkick. I mean, there's amazing career opportunities in that But Players Tribune was sort of one of the ones that they were at the forefront very early. It was financed by famous athletes such as Derek Jeter, as I understand it. And so I want you to kind of two-part question your experience at the Players Tribune. Obviously, you interacted with some very high-level people like Jeter, and then other career opportunities in these new and emerging platforms, and using these new and emerging platforms as sources to do studying to find out where the opportunities are and who are driving the opportunities. At the D1.ticker, athletic director, I mean, there's just a lot of really, really good platforms out there that didn't exist even when you were coming through, and damn sure didn't exist when I was coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. As you think about it, it almost derives from the whole Facebook shift a few years ago, where they started to focus on community, and all of a sudden you start to curate these other communities. I'm not saying there's the direct correlation, but there is sort of the way that a big company like that gets you to think. Even with Apple, just as we're talking, I can point 5 different devices that are Apple that are in front of me. So what I think that's interesting about those platforms you mentioned is there's a perspective and a community there. And what Players Tribune, TPT, as we call it, has done so well is they've taken the voice of the athlete. And you're right, Derek Jeter's vision. And there's a lot more articles and conversations with him where you can hear from him directly on it. But he was asked a lot of questions that would inevitably get turned around by media or overspun by media. And he really wanted the opportunity to tell his story, not necessarily in the short form social media, at the time, 140 characters for Twitter or a quick photo on Instagram. He wanted some depth to the conversation. And that's what the Players Tribune at the outset wanted to do. And that's what Uninterrupted and Maverick Carter and LeBron have done with storytelling there, or even, what we do at Wasserman for our athletes, to say that it's their channel. What's their story? How do they want to tell it? It's not their day job, but we're happy to help them with it, right? Because we do it as a day job. So these emerging platforms, be it Front Office Sports or any of the others that you mentioned, have their communities, they're curated, and they're sharing remarkable information about the sports industry, and they're highlighting the key players and then a lot of themes. And to your question, that's where I think you can glean a lot of information to know what's going to be next and how you should focus on it. Just right now, we're all focused on the NBA and how they're curating an amazing fanless experience. Well, maybe you're interested in the future of live events and what that looks like. Follow everything related to the NBA right now, because you're going to understand it. So that's what these content and emerging platforms allow for, is just greater information and curation and community.
Yeah, and one thing that we're hearing and seeing a lot of is that, to your point, these athletes, they now have those platforms to tell the story and say the things that they want to say without a filter, a traditional newspaper or something like that. They have the ability to build these massive followings. They are sophisticated. They have the resources, and we see that trend following now into name, image, and likeness and college athletics. And I think it's going to happen fast and rapid, as well. And so that's you just hit on a big thing. Study these platforms, study how they're done, study what they're doing, and then I'm ashamed of how much I'm not, but I read so much, but I read for context, not just the article. I read to see if Raleigh Ann Gray is quoted, and then I'm going to try to track her down through LinkedIn, or I'm going to try to hit her up on LinkedIn and begin a dialogue with her and form a relationship with. But I want to speaking of passions, because I'm really, first of all, I'm really proud of you of what you've done, and I want you to tell our students and our listeners about Must Love Sports, because, like I said, it's one of my favorite things that you're doing. I know it's a passion project, like mine is a passion project. We pour our passion and heart into these things, but I think that it's some of the things you're doing could be so helpful and insightful to our students, and I want to open their eyes up to how your project, your platform can help them.
Sure. So, and thank you, obviously, for the chance to talk about it, because you have been such a champion of students and their growth. And I know we met in 2014 at the Coca-Cola Summit that you guys were planning,
Yeah.
but we've stayed in touch, and I've been able to watch and draft off the things that you've been doing, and having met you. So I appreciate that. But Must Love Sports honestly came out of me taking a minute for my personal life instead of professional, and getting married and needing to move cross country where my husband, now husband, but at time fiance, was living in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I initially started it as a consulting firm, really just an LLC to park the things that I was working on with some great partners. And once I got full time with either Players Tribune or with Wasserman, it really just became this sort of networking community. When things would come up, we would band together and have conversations, or we always get together at NBA All-Star. We have a, biannual Ladies in the Game dinner, just stuff like that. Just an opportunity to collaborate without any other context than we are in the sports industry. It's fun, and these are great people. But in the end of April, and I know you guest lecture at Auburn, and for a lot of your friends to talk to them about what you do, and because I've seen you do it, I've done the same. If there are friends that are teaching classes, then I'll come in and share what I've been working on or anything like that. And a lot of students from those emailed me in the end of April, namely 2 women from Wake Forest, and said, "Hey, our internships are gone." And they had great internships, really quality organizations who are not at fault for having to cancel, because they needed to take care of their current employees, right? They're worried about that environment. So the students reach out to me, and I literally just wrote back, "I think I can help, ... And in about 6 weeks, we turned around a 10-week immersive internship program, quite similar to your pivot.
Wow, it's incredible. I love it.
Yeah, and we've had 264 students in the core program and 355 in the total, and it ends on Friday. But stay tuned for what's next.
I hear a merger and a fusion in our future together, future professional marriage, where we bring these things.
Please, M&A activity with you would be great.
But because I will tell you, and I want to segue into this a little bit, is that what I am hearing from a lot of students, and I know you hear it as well, is a couple of things. Is one is that they are getting great education within the walls, but they may not recognize that they're in the campus is the ultimate professional laboratory. And you came out of Virginia, and I came out of Auburn. We knew we had put ourselves in that upper 5 percentile to get that coveted first job. It's going to be more competitive, and also the other thing that we've uncovered, though, interestingly, is interviewing, say, the athletic director of Auburn, Alan Green, Ross Bjork at Texas A&M, Greg McGarity, is that there are so many other new opportunities within athletic departments. It had really never dawned on me that mental health was a big need area for the student athletes. So that's a burgeoning topic. With name, image, and likeness, it's passed in 21, and I'm an advocate for passing it next week. If the kids are going to risk to play, let them pay it or get their money. But the compliance issues and rules following within the NCAA, or what is the fan experience going to look like, particularly in the college environment, because those facilities are not as sophisticated as, say, the Mercedes-Benz Dome or Levi's Stadium, or some of the new, more sophisticated professional arenas. And so we're uncovering a lot of that. But the program that you offer is like similar to kind of what we're doing, is enlightening the kids and pushing them out of their comfort zone. And they may not even recognize that, that these opportunities are in front of them. And even as rudimentary things as helping build your LinkedIn page, policing your social media, the right format to the resume to get your attention. So talk about the guts of the program, and how can our kids take advantage of your generosity in your program as well, and hopefully, like I said, we're going to work together one day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be remarkable. So big things to come. You guys heard it here first. But
yeah, that's right.
The crux of the program was to really, again, focus at that intersection of media, technology, and sports. And almost illustrate what I didn't know when I was coming out of school, just because
Oh,
honestly, we
wow.
didn't have sort of the platforms that you're talking about, right? You didn't have
Mhm.
all of this knowledge at your fingertips because it wasn't shared more broadly. LinkedIn wasn't totally a thing that was as valuable as it is now. And we started at the top with leagues and teams, but then we worked our way through community and innovation and content, gaming, esports, all the things that you guys covered. And then, this with it being our commencement week, we're making sure, and we've had these conversations consistently, but it's been nice to, as we've talked about, curate the community to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion and talk about the
Mhm.
importance of gender in sports. And there's been
Mhm.
moments this summer that have been contextually relevant for all of those
Yeah.
conversations. So having those conversations with students is so much better because, not that you or I are in a position where we can't change everything, but their voice will be louder for longer.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
it's awesome to know that they're focused on this stuff probably earlier, or at least when speaking for myself, than I was exposed to it in my career.
Mhm.
So at least it's a conversation we're having as opposed to the stuff that sort of happens in conversations behind closed doors and no one really acknowledges.
Well, the thing about it is, and I think you've hit on something, giant that all of us in the sports industry aspire to be in, and is that sports is now a true reflection of culture and society, and society and culture is now a true reflection of sports. But within that, it's going to create so many tremendous opportunities for this next generation of students because they are more sophisticated, they are more aware, they have more of this information at their fingertips. But let's talk about the other side of it for just a minute.
Sure.
You also, because one thing that we tell our students is that, hey, it's okay to express yourself on your social media platforms, but don't think for 1 minute that employers are not going in there and looking at your social media posts, your profile, what type of judgment, and those types of things. So, as sophisticated as they are, on the other side of that, there is a there. If you were counseling, kids in career, there is a balance. There is a mindfulness or awareness that you sort of got a balance of being able to express who you are, but also not crossing that line and showing an employer that you might not be able to exercise good or positive judgment in the process. Are you hearing that? Are you encountering that? Or is that something you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important, right? I didn't get social media until I was graduating, so I didn't have a footprint and no one really understood how to manage it. But much like we counsel our athletes or any person
Mm-hmm.
who is just perhaps just a normal human who may be in between jobs or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
anything that goes out digitally, even this conversation we're having, it's public, right? It's public
Oh, yeah.
record. And you want to always be authentic to yourself, but consider your authenticity in the way that it impacts others, if it's going to be negative, if it's something that you truly can't stand by. And then also, do you want to be open to learning from others? I mean, that's the most important thing, right? I talked
Mm-hmm.
about active listening earlier. Be actively considering what you're engaging with on social media. We have a lot of athletes who I counsel. Make sure you've watched everything
Mm-hmm.
before you like something, right? You may get to the end and they may sign off in some way that doesn't vibe with what you truly feel, but by liking it, you've effectively endorsed it. So you have to be careful about the social narrative that you put out there. And so long as it's authentic to you, that's great. But if, my mom always said, if something ended up on the front page of the local, newspaper or website, would you be proud of it?
Mm-hmm.
You want to kind of still use that lens, even though it sounds a little bit antiquated and like, don't always want to take your parents' advice, etc. But it's good advice in this sense.
Yeah, we call it the grandma rule. If you don't want your grandmother to see it, don't post it. Because to your point, and
Exactly.
I like that active listening and active engagement because in the old days, and by the way, I've made these mistakes, and like in the old days, you'd write a letter, put it in the drawer, and bring it out the next day. You'd cool down, you didn't send it, no hard feelings. If you hit that button on a tweet or an email, I mean, it is consecrated for forever. And like I said, I'm the poster child of that. But I think active listening, active engagement, and I'm going to use this line again. If you like something, you effectively are endorsing that message or that behavior, and that's a big one, because I've not that had happened to me, but I know it's happened to other people. Like, well, hey, I wasn't even paying attention to what I liked because one of my friends had liked it, and then I liked it, and then all of a sudden there's a forest fire blowing around me and burning around me, and so. But speaking of that, and you've got a high profile in the social space. You're very, very active, successfully active on LinkedIn, and we advocate that our students not only get the LinkedIn page but use it to do the research of their targets and their people and their listeners. But what gets Raleigh Ann Gray's attention on LinkedIn if a student reaches out to you? Because you get a lot of outreach, people reaching out to you for lots of different things. There's a lot of clutter on LinkedIn now, and that type of stuff. But what stands out in the crowd when somebody reaches out to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love these conversations because we get into a lot of stuff, but the tactical how to, or the stuff that, like you say, really get someone attention is important. For me, it's adding the context as to how we should connect and why. So if somebody just fires off the request and I have never engaged with them, it's likely just to sit in that parking lot. Or if I'm having a day where I'm going through my to-do list, probably getting ignored just because I don't know why I should connect with you. But if you're a student who, let's say, for example, is listening to this at some point, if you drop me a line and you mentioned this, or you mentioned that Vince said for us to get in touch, or you mentioned some piece of what we talked about here, maybe it is that active engagement line or some example, that tells me that we've got something in common and you've done a little bit extra. Not that you have to bend over backwards for me. You don't know me, but I'm more apt to help if there's some context and then some curation. The last point I would say is, if you're asking to connect and you want to actually get in touch with me, you should probably suggest, 2 to 3 times over the next 2 weeks that you'd like to chat. It's the connections where somebody says, I'd just love to have you in my network. There's value there later for you, but what do you want to talk about now so we can establish and start to build that relationship? So adding some context, suggesting some key times, and then being sure to truly say why you want to connect is always great, because it gives me a lot more context to the conversation.
Well, and I think you just hit on it, and we tell them that is that every interaction with Raleigh Ann Gray is a form of an audition, and they realize it now, but they didn't realize that. Like, hey, I heard you on Vince's podcast. Hey, go Cavaliers or go Commodores, or I love what you're doing with Must Love, or you work for Casey Wasserman. What's that like? They're showing you that they've made the effort. They're showing you that they're self-starters. They're showing you that they've taken the initiative to take the time and research you. And the things that you're saying, you're only reinforcing that. And we also tell them that, you don't necessarily have to put the hard sell on because you're busy, I'm busy. There's a lot of busy people they're pursuing, but maybe just even a sort of a soft approach, what I call the softening of the target. And then, a soft circle back and a polite nudge in a week or two. So I think what you said has reinforced this. And so as we wrap today, we always like to ask our guests, like, what are your go-to resources, or what are your go-to books, or what are books that you recommend they read, or podcasts they listen to? And they don't even have to be current books. Like, we hear a lot from, hey, I studied John Wooden and the Pyramid of Success and those types of things. We've heard a lot of good recos, but I'm actually fascinating to learn what are some of yours to share with our students.
Sure. So I do my best to read, if I'm reading a physical book, actually make it a physical book, and not, if I can, afford that in that time, because it makes me put down whatever device
Yep.
Right now, obviously, we're so connected because the only way to be able to see our friends, if you're being really safe about it, is through some sort of video conferencing.
Hmm.
So I try and have 3 books on rotation, one that's business related, one that's more educational and makes me just smarter about
Hmm.
something particular, and then just one that honestly allows for me to disconnect and enjoy. So right now, I've just finished The Ride of a Lifetime by my former boss, my boss's 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 boss, Bob Iger. And it's awesome
Hmm.
because for me it's really a reflection of how the company where I started my career started, and it also shares just a lot of fascinating information. It talks about when Twitter almost got acquired. I was there. I was in the middle of some of it. It was fascinating. So it's just a very kind of cool, introspective book. I've also been reading I'm Still Here. It's I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, just based on a lot of suggestions from my friends and conversations we've been having this
Hmm.
summer, which has been great. So that's more the educational side. And
Hmm.
I just reread Great Gatsby because it's just kind of one of my favorites. It's not like it's a um, mind bending book, but it kind of takes me back to a good time in high
Hmm.
school. So those are the 3 that are on rotation for me. So I try and keep that rotation. And I'll be honest, it probably only happens every 2 months. I'd love to say I could read all 3
Right.
books in a month, but like you kind of alluded to, we've got all this other stuff that we're reading for work, and reading for pleasure and education is something I want to do more and take more time with. I think everyone can benefit from.
Well, I like that. First of all, I like the fact that physical books is just nothing, because it does force you into putting the device down and getting interrupted on the device and the bright light shining in your eyes at night and those types of things. I like those 3 buckets: the business, the educational, and your comfort reading or your disconnect reading. I've not read Bob Iger's book, but to our students, Bob Iger, chairman CEO of Disney, one of the nice guys in the industry, and would be and by the way, I mean Disney's obviously, and they're in, obviously we're all in distress right now, but just an amazing machine. I think I'm Still Here obviously is so relevant to what's going on, in our society right now. And then I do like kind of the throwback that really just sort of takes you back. It's like listening to your favorite playlist or your favorite station on Sirius or something that kind of takes you back a little bit, because everything's moving so fast now. But I know we could go on and talk all day. This has just been, and I knew it was going to be just so much fun and so fabulous, of the interview and reaching out to students. I'm positive that you will hear from some of them. I'm
Great.
positive that they will want to sign up to the program and to the curriculum, and I'm positive they'll want to follow you. And I'll tell them stay tuned to what you and I may be doing together one day, because I've always wanted for us to do some great things together. And it's because it's funny, it's interesting now, like even 6 months ago, if you would reach out to somebody or a CMO with some crazy idea and they'd kick you off the phone or kick you out of their office, now they're like, hey, maybe I was thinking about maybe this is not so crazy right now. And I think that for to our students' benefit, fortunately, as sophisticated as they are, they're going to find a lot of a lot of more open minds in this process than maybe they would have found 6 months. So we always say, in chaos is opportunity, and change is inevitable. Growth is optional. Choose wisely, and we're all having to make that wise choice right now. So Riley Ann Gray, executive with Wasserman, Casey Wasserman, the founder of Must Love Sports. Like I said, I owe her a bet from the UVA Auburn game, although I'm going to honor that bet under protest for various reasons. And
You brought it up, not
great,
me.
great career. I think you and Amy G a beer or something, but your tremendous places: ESPN, Twitter, Players Tribune. I think our students and our listeners can see why that like I said, you'll probably be the commissioner of a major sports league one day, but in the passion and the energy and attitude, enthusiasm. So, thank you so much for sharing your advice and words of wisdom with the students of Melt University.
Beyond honored to have been here. And if I do become the commissioner of the NFL, as I would hope one day, I will spot this conversation as when everyone told me it had to happen, and I kept myself accountable. So
well,
thank you so much.
Just throw me a bone. I'll
Absolutely.
Probably be fishing on some pier somewhere, but I might still need to throw a bone. But we do appreciate so much, and it's been so much time. Thank you for taking your time today with us.
Great to be here. Thanks again, Vince.
All right. Melt University, virtual Melt University. We even removed the summer 2020 tag because we're heading into the fall, believe it or not. But Raleigh and Gray, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vince. Hope you enjoyed today's virtual class. We'll be back soon with another edition of Melt University 2020.